Say that again.
We're to me, they're saying that to build huts and then to build a wall is the the time frame. To me, to build the wall around where you want to keep people safe at night, because what I think led us to wanting to build walls around us is the fact that we stopped sleeping in trees and we started sleeping on the ground, and that made us vulnerable to the predators.
Sure.
So you figure out a way that, um, in the one that I've watched, the what is it? This not the story of us, the mankind. Oh, there's two, Out of the Cradle, and the other one about who was the first man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Let me see what it is. And so it in that one at night they just gather, you know, bush around them,
Mm-hmm.
brush around them, so that if some animal tries to get in, they will hear it. You know what I mean? It's built up enough that you can, but like protect yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, at that time, people's natural biological needs are not anything that anybody's probably ashamed of. I mean, I can't imagine people aren't having sex and going to the bathroom all around each other.
Right.
Why would that be a strange thing for us to do? Just because,
Well, so by
I
that,
mean, just because we start
I
staying in
mean,
one place.
so
Go
if
ahead.
by that logic, if we're really trying to rank, if we're really trying to rank the technological inventions, maybe the loincloth was before the wall, or the
or
clothing.
or clothes
Yeah,
were before.
clothing.
Well, I'm sure that clothes were, but clothes weren't about modesty. First Man, that's what it's called. Yeah.
Okay.
That the one that shows them building like a little enclosure with a lot of brush and stuff, and they also have huts, but they make it out of the bones of mammoths and stuff like that, because they're still hunter gatherers at that time.
Uh-huh.
They're talking about that you built a wall when you settled, when you became a food producer, when you became a farmer,
Hmm.
because then you settled and you needed you were staying in the same place all the time. And because of that, now things are happening. Like when you leave an area, all that waste that you've left behind, and I'm not just talking about like bodily waste. I'm talking about the foods that you have eaten,
Mm-hmm.
like the bones and all that. That brings other predators to you, that smell.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, they were always more safe by moving. Do you know what I mean? Like the predators couldn't lock onto them. They could a little bit, but not like for every day, because they would
Mm-hmm.
move. And then if you went into a new area, I'm sure a new group of predators didn't know you were there right away until they could smell you, you know? So, and then there was fire. We had fire before we
Mm-hmm.
had, walls.
Walls and
Yeah.
yeah, wheels and wedges. I think
So
that
if
maybe
you,
that should be that should be the it's a catchy title. Walls, wheels, wedges, and what's a W word for clothing? I don't know.
and
Wearables.
wearable and
Yeah.
woolen, um,
um.
textiles is
Yeah.
unfortunately normally the name for it. That's what they use on the archaeology shows, textiles.
Yeah. Or maybe it should be weapons.
Woven goods. You could say woven goods
Yeah.
because that was a big thing to weaving,
Yeah.
and weaving was a big thing to learn how to weave. That was
Yeah.
another great advancement, really.
Yeah. Well,
And how
anyway,
you and go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, obviously, and I'm not just deliberately trying to segue into the conversation about Article 5, but um,
But we are.
the real greatest invention of all time, in my opinion, would be language, you know, which becomes laws, which becomes the Constitution. You know, our ability to communicate, which is an invention, really. I mean, it's something some person, probably a woman, discovered that you can attach meaning to sounds. You know, they're probably already making sounds for each other, like as a form of entertainment, singing without meaning, you know, sort of just chanting or singing or just sort of uh, babbling, you know,
Laughing,
glossolalia, laughing.
laughing.
Yeah.
We laugh. That's not all animals laugh.
Mm,
Just
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not unique to Homo sapiens, but it is rare in the animal kingdom. Laughing, and
Hmm.
laughing is a part of vocal cords
Mm-hmm.
and working them.
And it's
And yeah, I think.
a social cue.
Oh, I'm sure they learned language for hunting.
Mm-hmm. No, I would say
Hunting.
language is a much more of a gathering necessity, because hunting is all about being very quiet and, you know, maybe hand signaling. Yeah, you might communicate with like hand signals and stuff. But for gathering, you need like more descriptive things. You know, it's the plant with the shiny leaves with the long stem near the river, you know, whatever. You need like
Right, and they do that.
descriptors. Mm-hmm.
Um, y- you're on the mode of the hunters being big big game hunters, and
Mm,
they weren't always, and that's why I'm saying that actually what Homo sapiens learned to do was to run other animals to death,
mm-hmm.
because we
I've
have
heard
an
that.
interesting way of um, you
Cooling
know
our bodies
being a
so we have
cooling our
long
bodies.
distance capabilities.
And not just right, and the other, because that's also like in Out of the Cradle, um, the Curiosity Stream documentary,
Mm-hmm.
is one scientist looks at our glutamus maximus. And you wouldn't have a glutamus maximus like that if it wasn't for running.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't just have it for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You have it for a reason, and it is to run. And he
Mm-hmm.
says, you can see it. I mean, when we do it, and no other animal really has the gait of a man
Mm-hmm.
or a woman, you know,
Totally.
that we can run like that we can, and slow down and breathe and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. They just can't. Hair,
Not
their
the
hair
fastest,
makes
but
them.
the most, yeah, determined, the
I think
longest.
we were the most curious
Mm-hmm.
and willing to be adaptable
Mm-hmm.
because of that curiosity, meaning we would eat anything. Go ahead.
Well, again,
Go
that
ahead with Article.
to tie it back to Article 5, our adaptation
Right.
ability, the ability to adapt
That's
is the
right.
key to survival, because if you don't
It is.
change and adapt, you become stagnant and uh, obsolete. And so, yeah, Article 5 makes the Constitution a living document, brings it to life, and gives us the ability to add on to it. And so it's laid out right here in Article 5, which I'll read, but I won't speed through the last part. I'll try and, I think to memorize this, the key is going to be to just memorize the important stuff and then learn the facts of the secondary parts, but just sort of state them, not maybe word for word, but just learn it. Um, but as far as the important stuff goes, that's, if I can memorize that, I'll be happy. So okay, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. As the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. All right. Well, I'm very happy that our stream
nice,
is not
long run-on sentence.
Yes, a nice and easy, short and sweet. Just the important, stuff. No fluff. Yep. I'm really happy that our stream is not crashing or dropping frames or anything. But that's it. That's the whole Article 5, and that's where the lifeblood of the Constitution lives, and that's what we are sorely lacking knowledge of in this country. And to recap from last week, we talked about HJR 48, which is, maybe I should bring that Article 5 back up. It's only one line into that long run-on sentence, HJR 48. It's the Congress, whenever it deems necessary. So obviously, Pramila Jayapal, in her wisdom, has deemed it necessary, but now she needs 2/3 of both houses to agree with her to propose HJR 48 as an amendment. And so
what are the initials on that? What is it? HJ?
HJR, House Joint Resolution 48.
Right.
And I don't know why it's a joint resolution and not just a resolution. I guess it's because it has to be.
It has to be just like when we went to our state legislators. It was a joint resolution.
Right.
Right.
But why is that? I think it's because it means
because it has to be passed by the other. Yes.
Okay. By the other chamber, the Senate in that case.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which
and a bill does too, but it does something else.
Yeah, they can be changed. They can be amended, but not have to be repassed or something like that. But in the case of a joint resolution, it has to be passed with the exact same wording in both chambers. So, so now that HJR 48, just as an example, is introduced in the House, they could maybe get 2/3 of the House to sign on. I mean, that's going to be tough. I'd have to really look into the whip count of the House to see where they could get those votes. And that would be a good exercise probably to do, because then if people saw how to do it on the national level, you'd know how to do it at your state level, because it's the exact same thing. You just have to look for who's supportive, who's been supportive of the issue in the past of, in this case, campaign finance reform. You have to look for people who have voted for other amendments in the past, or in this case of a state, other calls for convention. And any other clue that might make you think maybe somebody is amenable to the resolution. And that's how you build your whip count. And then you'd have to figure out also who are the people who are definitely opposed, who are going to be your opposition. Did I lose you? Are you still there? I heard a noise. I seem to have lost Pagan Communist, but I'll just keep talking and hopefully she can rejoin. Oh, are you back? Are you back?
I am.
Okay, you're back. Great.
Sorry, my phone just died.
No worries.
I mean, it's not. I still have battery. It just
turned off. It crashed.
Yeah,
You're pushing it too hard.
Yes.
Or you're getting tapped for. Speaking of matters that have
Article
been
5 and
deemed taboo
Amendment
by
or
the
anything.
establishment. Yeah, no.
Yeah, because I found the sixth assassination, just by the
Oh boy.
way. Hey, all I had to do was just do a search,
Well, but it's
and it
probably
came
doesn't
up. So
stop
I'm
there
not the only
either.
person saying it.
It's not just
What?
six. There's got to be more than six too, right?
Well, there is, but I mean, those are the six that that the powers
Uh huh.
that be. Um, okay, just a minute.
We'll get back to whip counts and stuff in a second. But go ahead. This is too interesting.
About what the assassinations, the six.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that what you're talking? Well, it's. I mean, I think there are many more, but I think that those are just the accepted ones. And his
Mm-hmm.
name is, I think it was Mercer, not Mercer. It's oh, merger. It was like that. Let's see, because I did. Um, now they, so I just think that that's more like it that that you would have six assassinations in 6 years. It's just a pattern. What can you say?
Hmm.
I don't. I mean, it's kind of, but that's what people would say. And it was four black activists and two white guys from the same family.
Mm-hmm. So this sixth one was another black activist,
It
civil
was another
rights.
black activist.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we'll research
Yeah.
that some more and we'll talk more about that. That's it is interesting, but um, I guess I was saying something about Congress. Oh
And the
yeah,
joint resolution, and
yeah.
why that it has to be that, even because I think a bill, if it
Oh,
starts on the House side, it has certain rules,
uh huh.
and if it starts on the Senate side, it has certain rules.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? And so it's not the same as a joint resolution.
Right. But so we have to get people to co-sponsor and eventually just vote yes for HGR 48.
Uh,
So we can all start by pressuring our own legislators, our own representatives, looking into our own uh, state representatives, and we should all know who they are. Not I mean not state representatives, but national our state our congressmen and women and senators,
Congress people, yeah.
congresspeople, and senators, uh, and knowing who they are, knowing their office phone numbers, and knowing how to call them and leave a message, or maybe possibly talk to them. In the case of state legislators, it's very likely you can actually talk to them. For your actual federal representatives, more likely you'll just leave a message with a staffer or a voicemail. But you say your name, your city, or wherever you're in their district, and you tell them what you want them to support. So in this case, you would be saying, please support HJR 48 to the We the People Amendment to um, get money out of politics. Your short little message. We kind of went over this last time, and then once you've done it for your own representatives, you can call other friendly representatives to try and get them to solidify their support as a sponsor or co-sponsor. And then you start to move on to the maybes, the people who are on the fence, maybe. And probably in this case, we know that most likely they're going to be Republicans. I mean, on this show, we don't need to really be too bipartisan. I think we're fairly open about our politics. We're progressive, right? Um, so
Well,
in
yeah,
this,
I guess with a name like Pagan Communist, a lot of people aren't going to see you as a conservative. But if you want to, by all means, go
yeah,
for it. Because, hey, I am very conservative. I believe we should conserve every single part of the Earth's resources we can.
agreed. Yeah, we're conservative in the old way. Um, but so now we need to talk to those, and it's not just conservatives; it's also corporate Democrats, people on the Democrat side who are bought by money in politics, who don't want the system to change. So we could take a Joe Manchin for example, because he's going to be the first roadblock in the Senate. Because let's say we get 2/3 of the House, then it passes over to the Senate. Or yeah, I mean it's introduced in the House, so then it would pass over to the Senate, and it would take 2/3 of the Senate. So you need every Democrat and a bunch of Republicans to vote for it. So your first hurdle is to unite the Democrats. You got to get Joe Manchin on board. So what can you do? Start calling his office. Start leaving voicemails. Uh, you can fund primary challengers against him because although the problem is he's not up for reelection for a long time. But
Right.
another idea for how you could pressure him, work on getting West Virginia to call for a convention for that amendment. If West Virginia had an open convention call on their books from their state legislature, it would definitely pressure him. And anybody who then, you know, if he certainly couldn't hide behind his constituents and say they don't want it. I mean, he does that all the time, but if his own state legislature said we want a convention to have this amendment, he would have really no excuse. And same for all the conservatives, who might say they're against crony capitalism. If their state legislatures had passed resolutions calling for a convention, I think it would put tremendous pressure on them. And also just phone calls to their office. So it's all about pressure. It's about carrots and sticks. And it's about knowing the process because, yeah, we have to pressure them. And what tools do we have to do that? It's all right there in Article 5. And, what are we going to do? We're gonna do it one way or another. Adventures of Anna. Hey, Queen. What's up, Adventures of Anna? I guess you're talking to pagan communist, saying, "Hey, Queen. Hey, yourself. Welcome. Ask us
That's
questions,
right.
please. If you
By
have
all means,
questions
about
about
the Article 5 or anything else that's not too personal.
exactly."
For that, for that, you have to have money. Okay, we're like everyone else.
Yeah. Uh, but what do you think, PC? Are we? I mean, do
But
you
I do.
agree
I
that?
think that
Do you
that
agree
is a
that
good thing.
we should be pressuring? We should still be pushing for states to pass convention calls to pressure um, the Congress, basically.
Well, of course, I think that that is what you need
Yeah.
to do. And I mean, if you, since Joe Manchin has decided to, present himself as, I don't know, king, unelected president, whatever that he is right now, because he's decided he's going to make all the rules, right?
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
that if if West Virginia did were able to, because I don't know when their state legislature meets, I don't know when you're able to introduce joint resolutions
Uh-huh.
into it. All that is stuff that can be found if you search it. It's not hard. That then he might become more concerned because the people of West Virginia are doing something about that, about getting the money out of politics, the corruption that we feel is in politics right now, that most people feel, regardless of your political persuasion, to be honest. And they, instead of just being calling his office, which he somehow doesn't seem to care about either, because I'm sure that if as many people in West Virginia wanted a $15 an hour minimum wage, I'm sure they were calling his office,
Mm-hmm.
because I would be. I mean, I can't believe. And if nothing else, there's a lot of Republicans in the state. Why wouldn't they want $15 an hour? And he's a Democrat. So if you don't think I'm going to hit on somebody, you know, I can't imagine they weren't just like calling up and threatening him. I'll be honest, okay? I mean, they were Republicans threatening him in some way, like they weren't going to vote for him, or they might as well just get a Republican in there, or whatever that they were going to do. I don't know, because I think that
Yeah.
the calling for a convention is another avenue to put pressure on them. And by doing it with him, at least, then the other senators, who there appear to be about six of them, like, right, like Kristen Sinema, and who's the other?
Democrat.
I know there's an yeah, there's like six Democrats, at least four. I'll think of the other guy. No, he's a he's from what could be a conservative district too. So I'm trying to think, or a conservative state. Um, but then they would know that that could be coming to their state as well, and it kind of shows you up to the local legislature, the state legislature, to say, look, these Congress, just because they're in Congress, doesn't really set you up above them. Just because they're federal in your state, you have just as much power as they do. But the state legislators seem to be very afraid of using it. That's what the call for an Article 5. That's the power of the state legislator. What
Mm-hmm.
could possibly be the reason that the framers decided to allow the state legislators to, in all intents and purposes, have the same power as the US legislators?
Mm-hmm.
Was it because they knew that their real plan was going to cause such disrepresentation, disappropriated representation, like what's happening now, where something like what was it that we, like, 13 Congress people, senators, something like, 10 senators get as much power, for their five states that
Right.
hold like 2 million people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm joking. Okay. This is all made up.
Well,
None of this is based on
but
real facts in front of me, but what we're talking about does have a fact base, which is California and New York get
mm-hmm.
two senators each.
Mm-hmm.
Between them, they have almost half the population of the United States, a
Mm-hmm.
third of the population, quarter.
Yeah, a lot.
So that's right. So the framers knew that it was quite possible to get this really disappropriation of representation on the system that they made. Okay, I'm just telling you what I think of the framers, because
Well,
they knew they weren't perfect. They knew they
exactly.
weren't
Yeah.
perfect, and
Yeah.
somebody said, "Look, we need to do something here. We need to tweak this, because this can get out of hand real quick." And I
Well,
think that's when they said, "I do. I
well
think that
here's
they knew that because." Go ahead.
Adventures of Anna is messaging also. She said who
Oh,
but also who cares what some old white guys thought 200 years ago. Um and I agree with you that we shouldn't limit ourselves to what they were, you know, setting up. I mean, we are limited by the system that we have, right? But we're definitely not limited by the scope of their thoughts and ideas. And so, you know, we need to understand what power and leverage we have available to us. And back to something you just said a second ago, pagan communist, is state legislators are very afraid to use that power of calling for a convention. That's their role in Article 5. It's like it's honestly it's their the most sacred duty of state legislators because it's Article 5 of the Constitution. I mean, it's up there above the amendments, above the First Amendment in importance. It's in the body of the Constitution, and it gives, yeah, state legislators equal power to Congress to amend the Constitution. So it's incredibly important. And the fact that they're also either ignorant about the process or outright afraid of it, I mean, that's a real problem. And it's caused stagnation and it's caused, um, yeah, disempowerment of the voters and disempowerment of the states, which has led to an out of control, dysfunctional Congress that's inactive, can't get anything done. I mean, yeah, they're getting things done now slowly and sort of on the margins, but they're not able to get real systemic change because you have to rewrite the source code, and that's the Constitution.
And that's the only thing that we're talking about when we want to know what was in the minds of those old white guys,
Right.
because really, I do know what was in the minds of those white guys, and none of it was good. Okay,
Uh-huh.
that's my point. Except maybe the Article 5 of the Constitution. That was probably the best work that ever came out of that group of old white guys, and they weren't even that old.
Realize that they weren't perfect. I mean, they definitely probably thought
It's
highly of
something called it
themselves,
because
but
there were,
go ahead.
well, and we want you to know that like, as I speak about Madison as a framer, he did everything he could to make it so it would never be really a democracy. And that's my feeling on it, and that's my belief. And I would love to talk to a historian who's
Well,
done his thesis on this,
uh-huh.
got his doctorate on this in some ways, because I think it'd be a really interesting one to have.
Here's
But
a
on that
I
note,
have a thought
we'll
about
move
that, but
on.
go ahead. Well,
Okay.
okay. No,
Well,
if we're
it's more
before we move on then
okay.
on that thought, I think it ties into the fact that they I think they probably wanted it to be a democracy, but they wanted it to be really hard to attain so that they would know that it was earned. You know what I mean? Because they really didn't trust commoners, basically. They didn't trust normal people. Um, but I think they knew that if it's that normal people would want, power and representation, but it would be hard for them to get it so that it's really hard to amend the Constitution. It's really hard to um, you know uh, impeach a president or anything that takes like 60 votes in a very undemocratic thing like the Senate is really hard. So it takes a real like enlightened and motivated populace to make those types of things happen. So it's kind of like it's kind of a system that makes you prove your worthiness. Basically, if you want to have representation, if you want to have a democracy, like you have to fight for it, and you have to prove that you understand it and are worthy of it. Basically.
Okay. Well, see, mine is a little bit more simple, which is that the the other guys,
Uh huh.
the ones that looked at the Constitution and that got swindled out of it, the whole deal, and that's how that we sort of got the Bill of Rights here. They said, "Look, you need to put something else in there too, because
Okay.
we're not going to accept that either." See, so that could have been it as well, or
Right. That it was two
something
sides
alike.
disagreeing with each other. Could
I
be.
think that at that time, you have to realize the states were very, very powerful because they had not
Mm-hmm.
become united yet.
Right.
And each state, and so the people who held power in that state knew that they were going to lose some power when they did become united.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that all this was done out of the goodness of anybody's heart here, okay? Although I do think there were some who thought that there were rights that the citizenship, or not even the citizenship, the people of the land on which they stand should get these rights. They should be able to pursue happiness. They should have a right to free speech. They should have a right to freedom of religion because they didn't want those squabbles and those things that had been happening and, massacres in Europe to continue over here. I
Mhm.
think was part of it. They just gotten out of a fight. We don't want to be fighting about this stuff anymore. We don't have the resources for it. We've just got to, you know, go on as a people, as a
Mhm.
group of people together and respect what each other thinks enough to stay united. And then we got a civil war because
Mhm.
that changed. but but I think that that's where that it could have come in too. I mean, I'm not saying that yours is not the right one either. I'm just saying there are a lot of things that go on and people didn't really write about it because they didn't want to write about it, and even if they did, many of those other inheritors of such papers could have destroyed them for their own, desires,
Mhm.
whatever they were. Some people, lots of peoples have had Victoria, Queen Victoria had hers, Emily Dickinson. I can go down the list. People will just burn other people because they don't think they should know that much about their private life.
Mhm.
Who am I to make that decision for someone else about
Mhm.
something that's already happened? So that's why we don't know.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess we don't know their motivations exactly. They obviously weren't perfect, and I guess at least enough of them were aware of the fact that they weren't perfect to persuade the rest of them to put Article 5 in the Constitution. So,
Or we're just afraid enough of a bloody revolution after
mhm.
already being in, a revolution basically.
Oh,
But unfortunately, we didn't even make it 100 years without what I consider in its own way to be a revolution. It wasn't. It was a civil war, but that's a division. That's
right.
that's not a good thing for a country because your resources are just so depleted because everything was you.
Now,
All the food was you.
now Adventures of Anna is asking another uh, question that I think I already know your answer to, but they ask, but who was the cutest signee of the Constitution?
Jeez, I have no freaking idea. I've
The
never looked at
cutest?
them.
You don't think it
The
was
cutest, the most handsome,
had to be
the
Hamilton,
best
right?
looking.
Wasn't he regarded as a legendary ladies' man?
Well, he was good looking. He was good looking. Jefferson was good looking, but he was shy.
Ah,
Hamilton was supposed to have a lot of,
mm-hmm. Charisma.
well, he seemed to have more confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But then I could understand he was really
He
quite
was,
clever.
yeah, he was, yeah, he was smart. I mean, they were all smart,
He's very clever.
but
He was really clever.
uh
He
huh,
could put a lot of stuff together. That's even hard. I mean, that's more than just being smart.
mm-hmm.
He kind of, he was in charge of getting things around.
And
That was his
confident,
job.
like you said, very confident.
He
Yeah,
was.
yeah, and he was a little too little whatever too in love with the ladies, and that cost him politically. At least if you watch the play, that's what they
He
make it out to be.
he did end up having an affair on his wife, but it was after they'd been married for many years, and I'm not really sure. He doesn't really know why he did it either.
In the
And then his
play they
son,
make it.
and then his
Go ahead.
well, then that's the son gets into a duel
Right, to
over
try and defend
his
his
father,
honor.
and he dies.
Yeah.
So like Hamilton, I think Hamilton died with nothing but regret at the end. And that's, except maybe for, but I think
Well,
that'd be pretty hard to deal with.
I mean, if he was responsible for Article 5, I think he more than made up for any
Well,
shortcomings.
those are his personal forgivings. I'm not talking about, that's, I think though that when you go, even as a personal, and a person, even if you've been very much in the public eye, when you go, it's really about private for you. It's about the things that matter the most to you.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, to him, he could think that, helping to build a nation was really good, but to lose your own child, you know, over your over your actions is pretty hard. I
Yeah,
would think.
no, I mean, it was a, yeah, tragedy for sure. And I mean, those old systems of honor and stuff, I'm glad we don't have that stuff anymore. Although I think we could use a little more honor in our
Oh well, that's one of the things it
population.
says about in the Vertigo years.
Uh huh.
By the way, it's a wonderful documentary.
Oh
It's on
yeah.
Curiosity Stream. It's by Philip Bloom, who I will tell you my favorite quote that I heard him say,
Hmm.
and I totally and absolutely believe it. No dictator ever approved of jazz.
Hmm. That is a good one.
Right, I told you. That is a good one. So, in the vertical years, believe it or not, in the years between 1900 and 1914, dueling came back.
Hmm.
Men started killing each other with swords and pistols again
Huh.
because women wanted the right to vote.
Hmm.
I told you, it's a great documentary.
Hmm.
He's excellent, excellent, excellent.
I also
He's
think
very
no
good.
dictator ever was in favor of psychedelics.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that they. I think you're right.
Yeah. Well.
They're just always in. They always like alcohol. But anyway,
Hmm.
dictators seem to like alcohol. What can I say? I mean,
Hmm.
just from a historical point of view. Monarchs too. I mean, same thing
Hmm.
in a sense. Traditionally, we're not talking about the monarchs of the last 200 years or whatever, 300
Uh,
years, or constitutional monarchies, as they call them, constitutional monarchies. Anyway, so back to like the Article 5. Yes,
yeah.
it's, but
I
the
do
big
think
thing
that.
is that these
Sorry.
state legislators are just as important
Yes.
to the Constitution
And that, I think
as
that really
the
works
U.S. Congress.
as
And
a to
yeah,
appeal to their sense of grandiosity, just inflate their ego and tell them you're like up there with the founding fathers if you would just take this power that's been given to you. uh you're such a crucial role in this constitution. You're right there next to Congress, as far as your power to amend the constitution and and played up the importance that the founders saw in their position, etc., and how history is made and all that type of talk. That can really that can appeal to their sense of duty or ego or whatever type of person they are. You have to read their
well, and then
individual
and then
personality.
and then you get the other side, right, where you say, and but obviously Congress doesn't see you in that light, because when they pass an amendment, they just expect you to ratify it lickety split, don't
Mm-hmm.
they?
Mm-hmm.
And you can start, you can name many that have come. We're not talking about the one that took 123 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about the one that took 123 years. We're talking
203
about the
years,
one
you
that
mean?
took, I'm talking, yeah,
Yeah.
203 years.
Yep.
the 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 one I'm talking about is the one about the civil rights, which it needed to. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that shouldn't have been ratified that quickly, because it was way too long in return. I mean, it had been waiting too long.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one about a civil rights voting. that's the part of the Constitution that's the part that, as you know, makes me the most angry about the founder or the framers or whatever you want to say, because
Uh-huh.
they wanted elections, but they really never stipulated how, they just let the states do it, which I feel is totally erroneous. Why are you having states take care of federal elections?
Mm.
Was it because there was no money to make a federal elections board?
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't want to? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because they wanted everything. Because even like that was the big deal about the treasury and all that, the stuff that, about it being all in one place, not all in one place, but having a centralized government and all that stuff. And of course, the Article 1, it has to do with money.
I mean, it
The Article
probably
1 of the
all.
Constitution has to do with money.
Oh yeah. See, I need to learn more about all those other articles. I don't know that much about them, but I think it all had to do with selling the Constitution to the newly formed country to not, to make people have confidence and think, okay, we're not just going to turn back into a monarchy overnight. There's some recourse for amendments. There's, states have their rights to make to do voting in their own way, etc. So like, it's not just going to be a totalitarian or a you know um, united uh, hegemony. That's the word I was looking for.
I know, but that's the part that makes no sense. In the things that you are united in, you have to you should do them united.
Hmm. I agree. Yeah,
And
I
that's what
think
I'm saying
voting is one
about.
of the ones that makes perfect sense to
And I
be
mean, if they
a federal
go ahead,
thing. Hmm.
or I was going to say at least the federal elections, the
Hmm.
U.S. Congress people, the U.S.
Right.
senators. That although senators were not always elected, and
Right.
that was one of the ones that has also almost gotten to an Article 5 convention call.
The 17th Amendment. Right.
The 17th Amendment, I think
Hmm.
it was.
Direct
And
election
that
of
was the
senators.
early on. That was early, like in the
Hmm.
early 1900s.
Hmm.
And it might have even been New Mexico or Arizona, one of us who got involved. I think it was us who changed it. That was 1917 or something. But it takes a very long time to get a call for a convention. Most of them, when they get close, it's decades. Decades. Look at the ERA. Okay, and that isn't even really a call for a convention, according to what I've heard. It's
It's an
something else.
amendment. It's a proposed amendment, right?
Well, that's in a discussion with someone that I learned about the Article 5 from. When I brought that up, because I am a boomer, so I know the ERA.
Hmm.
That's from my lifetime. They said that no, it it hadn't been asked to have a call for a convention. It was asked being ratified by the states. To just be an amendment. So did Congress? Maybe that's it. That Congress put forth that amendment, the ERA, and we are now waiting for the states to ratify it to be an amendment. That's the one we got to check, I guess.
I'm looking right now. I don't know if I can find it quickly enough. Let's see. Oh, Congress had originally set a ratification deadline of March 22nd, 1979 for the state legislators
That's
to
what it was.
consider the ERA. Through 1977, the amendment received 35 of 38 with wide bipartisan support. Both houses of Congress, President Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter, ERA seemed destined for ratification until Phyllis Schlafly mobilized conservative women in opposition. Mhm. These women argued that the ERA would disadvantage housewives, cause women to be drafted in the military and lose protections such as alimony, and eliminate the tendency for mothers to obtain custody over their children in divorce cases.
I don't know why any of that. How could that be so with an equal rights amendment?
Hold on,
I
many
don't. I
labor
mean, I don't know how they could. If
many
there was
labor
some spin
feminists
put up.
also opposed the ERA on the basis that it would eliminate protections for women in labor law, though over time more and more unions and labor feminist leaders turned towards supporting it. And then Idaho, Kentucky, Nebraska, Tennessee, and South Dakota voted to revoke their ERA ratifications
Right.
before the 1979 deadline, and then blah, blah, blah. 78 Congress passed by simple majorities in each house. The President Carter signed a joint resolution with the intent of extending the ratification to 1982. Blah blah blah. And no state legislators ratified between 79 and 82. So the validity of the disputed extension was rendered academic. Yeah. So it's dead. In other words.
But I thought somebody just ratified it.
Let's see.
Okay.
In the 2010s, due in part to fourth wave feminism and the Me Too movement, interest in getting the ERA adopted was revived. In 2017, Nevada became the first state to ratify the ERA after the expiration of both deadlines, and Illinois followed in 2018. In 2020, Virginia's General Assembly passed a ratification resolution for the ERA, claiming to bring the number of ratifications to 38. However, experts and advocates have acknowledged legal uncertainty about the consequences of the Virginia ratification due to expired deadlines and five state revocations. Yeah, so to say that it has 38 is kind of ridiculous because.
I'm starting to laugh because it's like, see how this 50 state strategy, okay, the any state strategy, I just keep, oh, maybe this is really sort of why the framers did that. That's what I told you. They just got mad at the states because the states wouldn't come up with anything. Really, they would just bicker because the problem was is that they weren't all the same size. Literally, they weren't all the same size. So
Right.
that puts some of them at a disadvantage, and they didn't like it. And then it became such a mess, and we couldn't. We had no money, and we couldn't get anybody to lend us any money.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this is really all about. We had no money, and and without a federal government, they had no way to get any money. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why they had to stop the states from just being states, like individual little countries, and say, oh, there's certain things that we will do all as united.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very strange because even now there are many things. But
But as far as the legitimacy of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, I think it's pretty obvious. Well, it hasn't been added to the Constitution, so scholars or whoever's in charge, I guess the Supreme Court is in charge of interpreting all those resolutions or whatever because they haven't because first of all there was states that revoked their ratification. New Mexico revoked ratification of a different Article 5 call. Well, that was a call for a convention, not a ratification of an amendment. But I think in theory, yeah, a state legislature can revoke its ratification of an amendment if it hasn't passed yet. It seems to have worked.
I don't know because see the problem that you have with that,
Uh huh.
it's not the same legislators.
Right.
So that in theory is somebody else undid what somebody else did.
Right.
Do you have the right to do that?
I would
That
say
becomes the
yes.
question,
I
doesn't
mean,
it? Well,
because
you, but this is
yeah,
a legal thing, and
and I
that's
mean
where
it.
the
In this case, it doesn't help my cause, or the cause of just getting more amendments. If you want more amendments, then I
no.
would just be saying, yeah, no, they can't take it back, no backsies. But it seems like, you know, just to be intellectually honest, it's like, well, it's a living document,
Well, see,
and these are
see,
these are
as we know,
active
the problem that I
processes.
have,
Hmm.
okay, the problem that I have sort of with it is by, and the reason that I'm saying that it's not the same people doing it is that we know how money has corrupted politics. I mean, it's
Hmm.
always been. corrupted, but now it's really corrupted, and it's been really corrupted like on one side for a long time. Now the other side is getting just as corrupted from it, and so it it's like if you could
Mhm.
buy a state legislature,
Mhm.
which could be done,
Sure.
then you could have them overturn what the other state legislature did because
Well,
you don't
but you
want
could
the amendment to
also,
pass.
but then the power of activism could also flip it back the other way, because it
You
could.
know,
Mhm.
I think you count an awful lot on activism. I
Well,
think that that is.
but we also need
I
it to work in our
realize that
favor
we need
sometimes,
to.
because if it ever goes the other way, if they ever, propose a bad amendment that we disagree with, we might need them to take it back, you know what I'm saying? And we would
Yes.
need to be able to let, if we say that no, once it's done, then we can't ever uh call our representatives and ask them to revoke um something that's been
Yeah, and
done.
well, see, that's the problem when you have money in politics and you have activism.
Well,
I mean, that's what really, because then you're asking them to decide that you are somehow on the surface more honest. And I'm not
yeah.
being cruel here. I'm being
Say
the
goodbye
situation
to
that someone's
Adventures
being
of
put in.
Anna. Adventures of Anna says, "Got to go
Oh,
later. Thanks for stopping by."
bye. Bye. Yeah. Sorry if we got boring.
No, they got to go.
I hope we didn't get boring. I hope we didn't get boring on you.
No, no, this
Anyway,
is good. This is good shit. What? So yeah, no, you're saying that uh,
that
money in politics
the
is the
state
problem.
legislators are put into a position of where when one person says, I'm an activist, they're supposed to know that that's an activist and not a lobbyist.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not as easy to see. There's not, we don't have, things branded on our foreheads,
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Right.
Or in the other case, like I said, if you could buy enough of a legislators to brand it and the activist goes against it, look at how that's working for West Virginia. I mean, they have an overwhelming, something like 85% of the people in West Virginia want $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
What does Joe Manchin say to that? President, king, ruler,
Uh-huh.
whatever he is, Joe Manchin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about calling my senator tomorrow and saying, the senator, so the Senate must really like President Joe Manchin
Okay.
because that's what he's made himself, right? And nobody in the Senate's standing up to him. Nobody's saying, dude, Buck, you know
Uh-huh.
what your constituents want? You know what the people of the country want? Why, how can you stand there as a Democrat? Not even Bernie calls him out. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
Bernie can't really call him out. Yes, but he's an independent, so he's not really allowed.
Right. Well, I mean that's our
It's got
job.
to be another Dim.
Yeah. I mean
No, it's
Bernie
got
and
to
all
be
the
like
rest.
another.
Well, it really should be. It should really be Joe Biden and
Joe.
Kamala
It
Harris.
should be Joe. It should.
Yeah.
Well, we could call the White House and ask them how Joe Biden likes President Joe Manchin.
Well, I mean, really, what we need is people in West Virginia to
And
do it
they know
to
that, or they
pressure
wouldn't have
Manchin.
sent Harris down to. People are pressuring him.
Uh huh.
People are pressuring him. He is. I know he's getting calls. I can almost guarantee it.
But he obviously doesn't
I mean, I
care. He's
cannot
not
believe
gonna.
that Paula Jean Swearinger and Richard Ojeda have not. She had a statewide group, right? Because she ran for Senate,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a representative because he ran for that representative, and he ran.
He was
You'll
a
find a
state
way.
legislator at one point. I don't know if he still is.
And he was a state legislator. He's not now. And he
Hmm.
got that lawsuit. He won that lawsuit from that guy that tried to kill him when
Oh,
he was
right.
a state legislator.
Hmm.
Jeez Louise. I mean, now I don't know that it gets any worse than that. That somebody tries to kill you because you're running and they don't
Oh,
want you to win.
well,
And
how
it
about,
wasn't even
yeah.
your opponent, right? Isn't that what happened? The guy, like, he's in the hospital. You see him in the hospital.
Hmm.
And I think Odetta is very intelligent. I think he's very intelligent because he went up the ranks a long way in the military, and you don't do that as a enlisted man if you're
Hmm.
not very intelligent. That's how you get up there. That's how you get up there
Hmm.
because you know what has to be done. You know, you're aware of what's going on. You're smart. You're taking care of business.
Well, uh, what else? We're coming up on an hour here.
I know, but I'm just saying that about the Joe Manchin. That I'm sure those people. I'm sure those people have got their own people kind of energized about
Uh,
the fact. And I think people in West Virginia would just be angry, like I
what
said.
I wonder
I
what's
mean,
Joe Manchin's position on HJR 48. I mean, what's his excuse going to be on this one? Why is he against getting money out of politics? Well, I have some
because he doesn't
theories.
think there's a problem with money in
Yeah,
politics.
yeah, I'm sure he'll just say, well, that's speech. Money is, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, but should corporations have that right? I mean, and I shouldn't even call it the money in politics amendment. It's the corporate personhood amendment. It's taking away corporate, like, hey, Joe Manchin, why do you think that corporations are people? Like, aren't you a super Christian guy? And isn't calling a
Yeah, what
corporation
everlasting life or is
the
this?
same as a human, like sacrilege? Because aren't humans, God's
That's
favorite creature? And
corporation heaven.
yeah, yeah, really, where do corporations go when they die? Oh, they don't die? So I guess they don't, so they're not people. Well, anyways, yeah, I mean, it's like people who are just bad faith actors. I mean, he's not interested in an exchange of ideas. He's not interested in, you know, the truth. He's interested in power and what gets him the most
But what it is
power.
he is his donors. He doesn't see a problem with money in politics because he's taking advantage of it.
Right.
He's doing all this for his donors. I mean, the people in West Virginia, I mean, in some ways, I mean, I'm sorry for them,
Mm-hmm.
but you can only that's sort of the problem with United
Uh-huh.
I laugh the United States because I keep going back to us as the United States and when we weren't quite a United States and how we're sort of united in some things and not others and how we got a civil war out of all that. And that's obviously for another discussion. But
Uh-huh.
back to the United States, it's like I feel if I show up in West Virginia and say, hey, I'm this white girl from New Mexico and really dudes and dudettes, Buck and Buckettes, come on, get it,
Mm-hmm.
get it. Like this guy is just doing you and why what has made you think he wasn't like this the last time he was running?
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like you said, it's name recognition. They get in there and then everyone's like, oh well, I know who that is, so I'll vote for him. Well, no, you don't know who he is. You don't know who they are because you haven't watched one single vote they've made.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think people are awake. Part of it is because 40, still, I don't know how many millions, but 45 million people supposedly got laid off. I mean, I think those were the numbers. I don't mean supposedly, like, I think that was finally the last in number that they decided from the pandemic. And now places are sort of starting to go back, to business
Mm-hmm.
in certain places like the restaurants and entertainment and movie theaters or things like that. that that took a real hit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all those have come back a little bit. So the and then of course yes, because of the pandemic, there were certain growth in certain sectors. So people who could took other jobs if they could do it, and of course then they get the cream of the crop, kind of like Bettis isn't going to take somebody who's 45 years old when he can break somebody who's 25, make them go to the bathroom in a bag and a bottle,
Oh, Bezos, you
work them
mean?
to
Mm-hmm.
death.
Yeah,
Betas? Oh,
Bezos.
Bettis. Yeah, Bezos. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I did not mean to get those two names confused, and I'm very bad at that. I say, Sam and me, we could be related. I wonder if we do have some sort of. We must have a audio or a what is it? An audio DNA. The same now, because Emma always teases him about he can't enunciate anything right.
Mm-hmm.
Bezos, right? Bezos. So yeah, you get the cream of the crop because now everybody's been laid off. 40, and so the sectors that came back and made all the money and everything, anyway,
The money. It's always back to the money in this country.
it's always back to the money in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
It's how it all started. It's how, except, see, that was the interesting thing to me is that, the white slaves in the Middle East, they didn't get taken for money. They got taken for religious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bottom line. They were captives from the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
And Muslims took them and they were slaves. I don't mean they were slaves like on plantations. Some of them they say did work in my. I have no idea. There isn't a lot talked about that, and there isn't a lot written about that. And since I don't speak Turkish, and there aren't a lot of documentaries coming out of Turkey on that kind of stuff, I don't, I don't know much about that. But I do know that part. I do know that it did exist.
Mm-hmm.
There is records both in Europe about that some of them were captive and they were taken, and some of them could be bought back, and some of them couldn't, hostages or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
in Islam, in the Crusades, which was the Muslims versus the Christians. I'm not taking a side here. Okay, I got no
Mm-hmm.
dog in that fight. It's just more that it's just a fact. The Christians decided they wanted to go and take Jerusalem, and then they did, and everything was a hunky dory until they started acting like fools.
This is bonus episode, bonus content. Yeah, I mean the hit. I mean, why were the founding fathers? Or I mean, in this context, I don't mind calling them the founding fathers because they. I'm talking about the negative aspect of their characters, which was their slave owning. They were all men. They owned slaves. They were all white. They were all rich and powerful. Maybe some like Hamilton might have had a chip on his shoulder because he grew up poor, but he was probably the only one. Um, but I mean, that allure of power and money, you know,
It
it's
is that,
it's so hard to
and it's
overcome.
really Okay, the colonies were more about economic venture
Sure,
than they were religious freedom. And
sure,
I'll
of
start
course.
with that because I can, okay, start with the territories.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia, the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth the First,
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina and South Carolina. That would be Queen Caroline from Britain.
Mm-hmm.
See where I'm going with this?
Sure.
Georgia, King George. Right, so it goes on. So all those were ventures. Those were economic ventures.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the North, and actually the 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 Mayflower was supposed to go closer to Virginia because they knew that they were not going to do well if they went that far north because it wasn't that good. They had explored it. It wasn't what they could make money off of.
Mm-hmm.
The people like in Virginia and stuff had already gone north some by that time, Jamestown and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking a long ways. By the time even that the Mayflower showed up, they knew that it got harsher as you went north. The winters came and things like that. So, because people were fur trapping and doing stuff like that still, even over here,
Mm-hmm.
like even up in what we call Canada, you know.
But I
So
think
it
the
was,
the crux of it is how do you get people to listen to their better angels and not just do what makes them personally better off, you know.
well, and at that time when you are struggling, when you're struggling, when you're
Mm-hmm.
still living in a time where, like Dolly Madison's father becomes a Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
They are in the South. He owns slaves. He decides he will give up the slaves and move north. And he does that. I mean, I don't mean like give up. I think he takes them up north with him and then he frees them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he does give them a free, and her life is just really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And she sometimes they don't have enough food to eat. She writes that, and I don't think she's lying. She ain't no drama queen. She's just, she was just writing at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to give up your better nature when it's not just about when you're saying to
some
live.
some people don't. I mean, yeah, I agree. It's one thing to say it when you're living a life of comfort and ease like I am, so it's easy for me to say, yeah, everyone should just do the right thing, but no, it's definitely harder when you have nothing. But then
And
you
that's
look at
why she
somebody
ended
like
up.
Lula. I was at some
I
little
know.
gathering. Some person told me that they didn't like Lula and that I guess they have family from Brazil, and they said their person from Brazil is an economist and said all these things about Lula. So they didn't really know anything of what they were talking about. It just appeals to authority. Some person they know in Brazil who is an economist who said Lula is actually very corrupt and oh we don't like Bolsonaro, but Lula is not much better, you know. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Like whoever you're talking about is an economist, so by definition they're a cheerleader for capitalism, and yeah, Lula is gonna rub those people the
Or at
wrong
least in
way.
Brazil right now, they seem to be.
What?
In Brazil right now, they seem to be. An economist in Brazil must be cheerleading,
Well,
you know,
yeah, I mean, I'm saying that.
capitalism because
Mhm.
now the rainforest is adding to the CO2.
Mm,
Thank you. Thank
mhm,
you, Brazil. The lungs of the world. Thank
mhm.
you.
Yeah. No, I mean
I know, and
it's a mess.
okay, guys, so like this is the other thing I'm telling you about it, like where I hear a lot of this stuff is that very political channel, the Weather Channel. And guys always laugh about that, but it has been and always will be because it's talked about climate change and they're talking about it now very much, even just on the Weather Channel, because they have to,
Mhm,
because they're seeing it, because they're meteorologists and
mhm,
they can see even just in a short time what when all this start. Okay, that was part of it, right? I'm a boomer. We got told, I've told you the story before, like people got told, well, you got to stop doing this because it's not good. Well, how long do we have? Well, nobody really knows.
mhm. Yeah, so we
So
can
I
put it
don't
off
know.
a little
And
longer. We can wait a
no,
couple more
well, I mean,
years. We
I
can do
think
a few more drilling. We can do a few more pipelines. Just one more
Well,
rainforest.
okay,
Not going to hurt anything.
one thing I think for one thing is that the average person had no idea as to what situation that we're at because they're telling us, oh, like it went at one time, oh, we had to cap wells in the United States because they couldn't make money, right?
Hmm.
But we're importing all this stuff from Saudi Arabia. Even I knew that sounded like crazy, but there's no facts that you have
Uh-huh.
because there's nobody else saying, well, really, that's not true, and we or that is true, and we're
Yeah.
capping them for this reason and not that reason. You know what I mean? It was very hard to get even that sort of information out, and the mainstream media, after and even kind of before 1993, I'm telling you, it was kind of like after Nixon and Watergate, and
Hmm.
then the how like Congress. I feel like Congress, and maybe I just wasn't keeping track so much, but I think Congress and the presidency kind of stayed as aloof as they could. I think that's when they started doing the press briefings more like they have now. Go
Hmm.
back and look at who started it, and I think it's more like around that time so they can control the narrative. Do you see what I'm sort of saying? Is that this is a whole change about a relationship that's going on between the news, people who are
Hmm.
um, trying to find out about the politicians
Hmm.
and the politicians.
Uh-huh. And the voters
And
or the public. The
well,
relationship
and
is
yes,
changing
gives
because of money, because of deregulation of
and
the FCC, like you're talking about in
and not even
1993, Bill
no, I'm
Clinton,
saying
right?
before
No?
that.
Oh,
I'm saying that after Nixon,
okay.
when Watergate happened, everybody who was elected got all way worried out. Okay, and this is when Nancy Pelosi gets probably voted in. If we go back and look, something close to that. I'm not joking. I mean, maybe not after Nixon, but this is when a bunch of Democrats get in, and they get in for quite a while until Reagan, but they get in Congress and they hold Congress for a long time, but they can't hold the presidency.
Hmm.
You know what I'm? Because Reagan gets in, because like after Nixon, there's Ford just
Uh-huh.
for a little while, and he lost against Carter, and then Carter got into that Iran deal, and he had the Iran deal, and there's never been proof that Reagan, went underhanded and talked to Iran
Right before the election,
before the election, but
but that's what everybody
they
thinks.
stopped negotiating with Carter, and right after he won the election, they negotiated with Reagan. Now I bet they look back on that and wish they could shoot themselves. Do they think they wish they could nuke their country for that? Probably. Basically, right? Yeah, I mean that was really a bad deal on their part. I mean that went
Yeah.
south for them. Look at where they are now. And this
Yeah.
is where and that's what those decisions have led them as well. I mean, which just makes me kind of go, "Whoa." So,
Well, yeah, we need
so
to work on that, and hopefully they'll re-enter the Obama Iran peace deal, and hopefully Biden will make it easier for them to do that, and hopefully everything. And I guess now we might as well sign off because we're starting to drop frames a little bit.
yes,
So, on the subject of hope, we'll say keep hope alive.
with the Article 5.
All right, hell yeah. Okay, well, it was fun. Good stream
Yes,
today.
but we'll see you next week.
Next week sounds good. Bye.
Bye.